Hey folks, it's E-Man here, and I think I just wanted to talk about my feelings on like the legacy of like the entire Castlevania series and what it kind of means to like me or perhaps other people. Now, most of us, may only really know the Metroidvania Castlevania games. And those are good. I mean, they're good. They're probably not for everybody, but I kind of get them. They're kind of cool. Fight the boss, and it's kind of fun. And I know that this spiritual successor, Bloodstain, kind of follows that formula. But there were the other games. I did beat the first Castlevania game. It was hard. The original one on the NES, and the controls were kind of weird, but that was what made the game hard. But it was always kind of fun to think of like monster movies and other gothic things, and it is it's kind of weird, of course, that these games were made by people in Japan, like thinking up of European legends and whatnot of Dracula and whatnot. And I always loved the Castlevania games. It's like Castlevania 2 and Simon's Quest tried to do different stuff and then probably kind of ultimately failed. But a lot of people think that Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest is kind of like a precursor to what they wanted to do with the Castlevania universe. Even back then, back in the 80s, they were thinking about what to do with it. And I've played the ones, Castlevania 4, another really great game. Castlevania 3 in the NES is a great game, but of course, the version that we got here in America is super hard, and I've played it, and I know how frustrating it was to get through it. It was tough, especially when you get to the boss and you take like 2 hits and you're dead. Luckily, I had ways of save states and whatnot. Castlevania 4, a lot of people have said, a lot of other YouTubers have said too. You get Simon Belmont. It was Castlevania 4, Super Castlevania 4, I should say. It was one of the release titles for the Super NES, and Simon had a multiple directional whip. And it was somewhat a remake of the first Castlevania game. What's great about Castlevania 4 is it really takes your time. Like, it's a journey just to get to the castle. And that's kind of refreshing. A lot of these Metroidvania Castlevania games. Many of you don't know, I mean, it's a reference to the Metroid games, if you've ever played those. Maybe some people think it might be an incorrect term or whatnot. Anyway, a lot of these Metroid Castlevania games, Metroidvania games, I mean, they're good, but the problem is a lot of them take place in the castle, and there's only so many times, can you be in a castle? I mean, it's cool to be in Dracula's castle, but, like Castlevania 4 showed that there's, a lot more you can do. Of course, Castlevania 4 doesn't really have any role playing elements, it's just kind of an action game. And of course, we got Dracula X, which some people claim is an inferior port of Rondo of Blood. But in my opinion, I think Dracula X was like a completely different game, I feel, that we got here in the States. And I remember playing that, like renting it, and it was a fun game to play. Really was. Of course, Rondo of Blood, of course, is one of the best Castlevania games ever made of the original. It had all the new features and whatnot. But of course, most of the Castlevania games that we've had, especially the last one, like Order of Ecclesia, I think was technically the last like official game. I've played some other fan games, the Card Chronicles. First one was really hard, but the second one was pretty interesting. It had some things of Symphony of the Night, but it didn't really have the leveling up system, or it didn't go too nuts. But I think it was great. I mean, it was a creepy game. It was, it's a shame that, you know I don't know. Maybe we'll be seeing a new Castlevania game because of Bloodstained showing that people still want to play this kind of game. Here's the ultimate feeling I have of the legacy of it is that Castlevania was a very interesting game series. It kind of, tried to be different than other games, I think, at the time that it was made. I just think there are certain game series that just are fun to play. And maybe Castlevania got tiresome after a while. I mean, there's only so many times can you fight Dracula, and I've heard that when they set up the dates and timeline of Castlevania, they're kind of confused because now they're kind of like stuck somewhere. And that was one of their major problems. I loved Order of Ecclesia. It was a rather interesting Castlevania game. It was much different. Some of the mechanics from that I'm reminded of when I'm playing Bloodstained a little bit, especially playing as a woman character. And we know a lot of Castlevania games, the female characters we've missed out on. Like I remember hearing about the Sega Dreamcast that they were going to have a Castlevania game on it. Got canceled at the last minute, and I think what we got was, of course, the PS2 Castlevania 3D games. And I've heard the rumors that they weren't given enough resources to make a game that was really great. Of course, I've played a lot of those. Legacy is that these gothic kind of games and stuff. People still like to play them. People still like to think about the past and other periods in history. They're a little more interesting than it is in this day and age. But I do feel like this kind of the way the kind of gameplay that Castlevania, some of the older ones presented, I think people still like to play. Of course, I know a lot of you have probably seen a lot of these independent games coming out, and it has shown that we don't these big giant corporations, they're not really going to be our friends forever. I know I've heard of EA had problems in the UK with loot boxes and all kinds of stuff. It's kind of ridiculous. It's like I think that these big corporate executives running these game companies need to really start making some good games that people actually want to play. Those massive multiplayer games, I understand. I've played some of them. I understand that. But I think, I think that single player games still have a place. And I think they need to be making more of those. To me, I just think it's kind of silly why we have these multiple Call of Duty games coming out. And I think a lot of people really need to stop and think about how much money are you spending on these games, these multiplayer games, where they give you these, try to convince you to buy these maps and costumes and what. And in the end, and in the end, a lot of these multiplayer games, in 2 years, the server gets shut down and then you can't play it anymore. Or a lot of them, you constantly need the internet. Well, I mean, like, try to think about it. I mean, you're paying for the internet. You're paying for, the PlayStation Plus or the Xbox's online thing, and then you're paying even more money into it. One of the more bigger thing I think I feel like when I go into GameStop is I think I feel like they don't really appreciate gamers anymore, and they seem to think that all of us gamers will just drool at the next Call of Duty and just shell out $1 million for a game and not expect it to be good. I expect a game to somewhat be good if someone spends years working on it. People put a lot of time and energy and money into it, it would be nice if the game was good. So many often I've gotten games from GameStop, and they've just been like really crappy, and a lot of times they never say anything really if the game is really super good or what. I mean, I understand the sales and whatnot, but I mean, I personally do not go to GameStop anymore. Personal preference. I'm just like, and mostly I've been kind of uninterested in this current generation of games. There's been very hit and miss with whatever few games are worth playing. And of course, since I work a lot, I, don't have as much of the time as I would have to spend to even play these games. It's one thing I have, of course, appreciated about a lot of these Metroid Mania games is because you can play them for a while, get to a save point, save, and you can just, pick right back up and you know exactly where you are and what you need to do. There are so many games nowadays where, you know, you play them for a while, you stop, you save, or write down a password, you try to go back to do it, and then you're like, well, what do I do? Especially if it's been a while. I've had a lot of RPGs like that too, where, for 2 seconds they tell me where I'm supposed to go, but for some odd reason I skipped through the I skip through their narration and then I don't know where to go and I'm just stumped and I've actually had to restart. It was a Final Fantasy game and I was really unhappy that I know a lot of modern RPGs have fixed that and give you a journal to tell you what you're supposed to do. But it is always kind of frustrating, especially with RPGs. You spend like 30 hours playing it and then of course, well, where am I supposed to go? A lot of them have been like that for me. Six. But of course, we're not talking about Final Fantasy. It should be more about Castlevania. Of course, let's in order of ecclesia is a woman that has like symbols on her body, essentially like magic things, and it kind of had the same kind of almost the same kind of system. Whereas you're killing enemies, you all of a sudden you can gain their weapon abilities and use glyphs to attack. And the glyph system does kind of remind me of the shard system. I think it's quite interesting that Bloodstain has taken a lot of stuff from Metroidvania and Castlevania games. Apparently, especially since you use a female character. Of course, there has also been Portrait of Ruin, which was before that. Portrait of Ruin is technically a sequel to the Sega Genesis game Castlevania Bloodlines, which is another great game, and it was released on the Castlevania collection. It's going to be on the Sega Genesis Mini, which I'm not really sure. I'm really interested in getting another mini system. I mean, I have the Super NES and the NES. And of course, it's like I've said, it's kind of hard to find time to play anything or see if you really feel like playing anything at the end of the day after you've been at work for a while. And I'm aware that in Bloodlines, and of course, Portrait of Ruin, that the whole thing with Jonathan Morris doesn't really make any sense if you look at the dates they claim that so they were trying to combine Castlevania with Bram Stoker's Dracula, and I don't think they really paid attention to what they were doing. But Bloodlines has always been kind of an interesting game because it was on the Genesis, the Sega Genesis. It was kind of one of the main things is that, as we know, almost all the Castlevania games have been on Nintendo systems. And I have heard that the supposed Nintendo Switch version of Bloodstained is not particularly very good. I mean, it may be a graphic problem. The Switch is a little bit more sophisticated. Now, I've heard the rumors about the mini Switches and the more enhanced Switch, which I guess makes sense. I mean, we've seen a lot of more enhanced, like the PS4 Pro, but I think if you're thinking about getting a Pro, you should probably just wait for the PS5. because that's supposedly going to be backwards compatible. Pro. And plus, if you don't have, a 4K TV, and I've already heard the 6K or whatever they're developing is silly. But ultimately, I really like the Castlevania games, and I think they're one of the major staples I really think about a lot of times when I think about Dracula or playing video games. A lot of times I think vampires, of course, in many cultures. I also remember seeing like the movie Interview with the Vampire. Couldn't remember back when Tom Cruise was king of the heap, and now he's really not. He just cares about international attention more than anything else. And I think I may be preparing to do some videos on some other Castlevania games because I have done on Castlevania 4, Dracula X. I think ultimately with Castlevania, I think it's just one of those video game franchises I think that really needs to keep going for a particular reason. For us to remember the Gothic kind of era and understand that there's been a lot of, there were a lot of mistakes made in a lot of those different eras. Well, with Bloodlines, I mean, we have a whole thing of, World War One and the destruction, and then Portrait of Ruin takes place a little bit after World War Two, and it's another part of the world. Nowadays, we feel like things are stabilized, but I don't think they are. I think things are very much like they were before World War One, where there's all these nations powering up, and we're not sure what they're going to do. I think it's also because the series also teaches us that there's there may be good in the world, but there's also evil that once in a while it rises, and we have to face it. You know, where mankind is always on the brink of destruction all the time, and it is. I think there are eras where mankind is, maybe we might even think every 100 years. I think mankind may develop something new that we have to try to deal with, figure out what to do. So I hope that, of course, that Bloodstained has changed the minds of people, and perhaps maybe Konami will make us some more Castlevania games, at least one new one, and they could do whatever they want to with it, as far as I'm concerned. Well, anyway, this has been E-Man talking a little bit about Legacy of Castlevania. I hope you guys liked this video. I hope to make some more. So I'll catch you guys later. See you later.